I whisper a first truth into the cavern of your heart. The meaning you seek is already dissolving in your hand. Let this thought fall like a stone into still water, quelling all restless ripples. In this quiet shock, the noise of pretense retreats, and a single clarity stands. Existence bears no hidden code, no secret theorem to decipher, only the raw pulse of suffering and the ache of absence. You sense it now, the weight of life, the subtle yet ceaseless dragging of your will against an indifferent world. Pain is neither flaw nor anomaly, it is the structure of being. The breath you draw carries a million disappointments, hopes that wither at the slightest shift of circumstance, illusions crumbling in the daylight. In that breaking there is no tragedy, only truth. And in truth, a strange solace, the recognition that nothing was ever promised. You chase meaning in curated narratives, social constructs, promises of progress. Each promise becomes a chain around the neck, each hope a shackle. Modernity offers distraction after distraction, forgiveness in each purchase, redemption in each upgrade. Yet you remain hollow. The illusion persists, fed by the same hunger that cannot be filled. You realize that meaning imposed from without is no refuge. It is anesthesia for a wound that demands seeing, not covering. In the next quiet breath, feel the flicker of void. Separation, longing, the hollow chest of unsatisfied desire. These are not defects, they are your landscape. The world turns as a blind god, heedless of your pain or your triumph. You stand at the edge of that turning, and the abyss looks back with serene indifference. There is grief here, but also release. For to surrender to the abyss is not to fall, it is to become still in the center of the storm. You observe that suffering is not punishment, but the essential texture of awareness. Without it, consciousness would drift as a ghost in an empty hall. The soul in crisis is like a cracked vessel. The cracks trace the path of lived experience, and through them light enters harsh, cold, unsparing. That light reveals what you did not want to see. The fragile architecture of selfhood, shaped by fear and habit, masquerading as meaning. And then, a moment of release. The ego shatters its mirror. You see that longing for meaning is the self's final act of vanity, believing itself central to an indifferent cosmos. But when that belief is stripped away, emptiness becomes pure space. In that space, no illusions can take root. There is no should, no must, no future reward. There is only this silent presence, witness to each rising sensation, each wave of despair, each faint pulse of relief. You breathe again. 2 minutes pass, though time may not exist. The torrent of images, voices, desires subsides. In that stillness, clarity carries its own weight. You do not yearn anymore for meaning, you accept the absence. You do not cling to pain nor resist it. You permit suffering to have its shape, its duration, its end. Beyond the modern distractions, beyond the curated feeds, the relentlessly evolving narrative of success, there lies a desert. In that desert, you confront the futility of striving, the emptiness behind every name, every title, every accolade, and in that confrontation, your heart sheds tears, not of longing, but of release. You taste the void for what it is, unadorned, honest, unmerciful, and you discover within its harsh embrace the strangest relief, to be unburdened of expectation. Another emotional tremor. You feel the urge to rebel against despair. You sense a final tightening of the will, a wanting to fight, to build, to believe, but you let it pass. You let the impulse dissipate like smoke. Belief in meaning is itself illusion. To fight illusions is to reinforce them. Instead, you step back. You rest in the cave of awareness, where every impulse dissolves into silence. You sense the world not as a collection of meanings, but as a dance of causes and effects. Birth, suffering, death. Each creature moves under the weight of the will, seeking avoidance of pain, yet drawing more into its orbit. You see human culture largely as gesture and theater promises woven into stories, desperate acts of distraction. The grandeur of civilization turns into a carnival of illusions. You realize the theater has no backstage, only endless masks glistening in shifting light. At this point, another wave of relief arrives. You understand that to awaken is not to conquer, but to seize. to cease demanding that life justify itself, to cease begging for meaning, to cease believing in a future in which you finally arrive. Instead, you inhabit this moment in full gravity, weight, presence, and in that inhabitation, illusions unravel. The final release comes not in triumph, but in silent disappearance. Meaning fades like a candle guttering at dawn, flickering out in pale light. The will ceases its restless pushing and pulling. You are no longer aimless, because aimlessness is impossible for a will that has let go. Still your breath, still your thinking. Nothing demands your allegiance. You do not transcend suffering, you see suffering as unselected movement in the field of awareness. You breathe in the absence of illusions. You breathe out the illusion of self. You become the witness of suffering, not its victim. The witness of silence, not its creator. And there is no more you to speak of meaning. You are merely presence, as cold, as silent, and as unbearably clear as winter moonlight. The script dissolves like a final breath, evaporating into the air that carries nothing but quiet. The moment suffering is no longer questioned, it ceases to multiply. As long as we ask why, we keep the wound open. The world offers no answer, not because it is cruel, but because it is mute. It speaks in the language of cause and effect, not consolation. The infant wails and the stars remain silent. The old man dies in a room of machines and lights, and nature proceeds, unaltered. To suffer is to exist, and to exist is to be at the mercy of forces beyond the self's comprehension. The body aches, the heart fractures, the mind recoils, and nothing in the cosmos bends to ease that torment. All the prayers, all the philosophies, all the grand rituals cannot alter this primal silence. What is most unbearable in suffering is not the pain itself, but the illusion that it should not be. That life ought to be otherwise. This quiet lie, deeply planted in every culture, every doctrine, every whisper of hope, is the root of our greatest despair. For when life unfolds precisely as it must, and still brings agony, we believe something has failed, but nothing has failed. This is the nature of the wheel. It turns, and in turning, it crushes. Every flower blooms beneath a sky that does not notice it. Every joy flickers before vanishing into the maw of time. The sun warms the flesh only to remind it how cold the earth will be. Desire, this endless reaching toward a future that never arrives, is the engine of the will. It promises, deceives, torments. The will tells you, just beyond this suffering lies the reward, and so you follow. And just as your fingers close around the fruit, it turns to ash. The reward is always elsewhere, always beyond. And should you capture it, it soon decays. What you once burned for becomes mundane. What you once dreamed of becomes burden. The moment of fulfillment is but the pause before the next hunger. Look around. Every eye you meet carries a shadow. Some hide it behind smiles, behind wealth, behind knowledge. But the shadow remains. It clings to us like breath. It is not external suffering that haunts us most. It is the unrelenting awareness of our own futility. We know, beneath all pretense, that no achievement survives time. No love remains untouched by loss. No identity avoids erosion. The self we construct is a house of sand, and every wave of experience carves new wounds into its fragile walls. To seek meaning in the world is to place a mirror before a void. What reflects back is not truth, but projection. We see what we wish to see, not what is. And when the mirror cracks, as it always does, we are left not with enlightenment, but disillusionment. Disillusionment is not defeat. It is the shedding of false light. It is the soul's slow return to the shadow from which it came. And in that shadow, a new clarity arises. Not a belief, but an absence of illusion. A space in which one no longer clings. There is no cruelty in this. The world does not act against us. It simply does not act for us. The storm does not hate the tree it breaks. The virus does not mock the lungs it destroys. The silence of the cosmos is not contempt, but indifference. And in that indifference we find a strange freedom. For if nothing is owed, then nothing is betrayed. If life offers no promise, then it cannot disappoint. To awaken is to release the childish plea that the world love us back. It is to see the world as it is vast, unfeeling, and immeasurably beautiful in its coldness. How many lives are spent chasing an echo? The echo of childhood comfort, the echo of divine presence, the echo of some imagined future in which all the fragments align. And yet every echo fades, and we chase louder, faster, more desperately, until the chase itself becomes suffering. What is left when we stop running? Only the bare bones of being, presence without adornment, existence without justification, a quiet that terrifies because it does not answer, it merely is. Detachment is not rejection, it is clarity. To detach is not to become numb, but to feel everything without being consumed. It is to watch the mind dance and no longer believe it's sacred. It is to endure grief without demanding that grief be fair. The detached one is not aloof, but unentangled, not above life, but within it, unclenched, undemanding. For the one who detaches has ceased to believe in the permanence of form. They see all things as smoke, visible, momentary, dissolving. Modern man, more than any before him, is addicted to illusion. Not because he is more foolish, but because he is more distracted. The devices he clutches, the images he consumes, the narratives he repeats, all serve the same function, to insulate him from the terror of being. And yet beneath every glowing screen is a face that dreads the night. The moment he is alone with his thoughts, the machinery of illusion falters. Silence seeps in, and in that silence, truth returns like a cold wind. Life is not a story, it is a condition of constant passing, ceaseless change, and inevitable loss. To love in this world is to suffer, not because love is unworthy, but because everything we love will one day be taken. Time is the thief that cannot be bargained with. Every embrace is temporary. Every vow has an expiration. The more we open ourselves to connection, the more vulnerable we become to grief. And yet, to close the heart is not safety, it is slow death. So we suffer, not because we err, but because we dare to feel. And in that daring, we walk the only path worth walking. There is a beauty that arises only in the recognition of futility. It is the beauty of the final leaf, the dying star, the whispered goodbye. It is not triumphant beauty, but the beauty of surrender. When we stop demanding that life give us something it cannot give, we begin to see it as it is, not as a ladder to be climbed, but as a wave to be witnessed. Each moment becomes precious, not because it leads somewhere, but because it vanishes. Even the will, in time, exhausts itself. It burns bright, then burns out. When desire fades, what remains is not despair, but a calmness deeper than hope, a stillness not born of contentment, but of exhaustion. The tired soul does not wish to be saved, it only wishes to rest, not in death, but in the quiet awareness that nothing needs to happen, nothing needs to change. The world turns, the seasons pass, and in their rhythm, the burden of self slowly dissolves. You realize then that the path was never towards something but away from clinging, from narrative, from self-deception. You have not been becoming, you have been unraveling. And with each thread that loosens, the tighter knots of your suffering begin to release. The joy you once chased now arises without reason, not a loud joy, but a soft one. The joy of being without needing, of seeing without grasping. What the world calls nihilism is merely the first stage of awakening. When all values collapse, when the scaffolding of belief crumbles, one stands naked before the void. It is terrifying, yes, but also clarifying. For in that moment, you see what was hidden, that life was never yours to master, that your suffering was never proof of failure, but proof of your aliveness, that in the absence of meaning, there is space for truth. Truth is not comforting, it does not cradle, it does not inspire, but it liberates. It strips away the need to perform, to conquer, to win the approval of phantoms. It tells you, be still, let go. You were never meant to fix the world. You were only meant to witness it, to feel it, and, in time, to release it. Like breath, like dream, like self, the script flows onward, unbroken, just as life does. No climax, no resolution, only movement. And in that movement, a grace devoid of grandeur, a grace that asks nothing, promises nothing, but gives everything through its quiet presence. The soul does not awaken through striving, it awakens through surrender. through the slow, painful release of all it thought it needed. And when all is let go, when the self no longer resists, what remains is not emptiness, but peace. A peace that does not glow, does not sing, does not dance, but sits, like stone beneath the ocean, untouched by wave or wind. A peace that cannot be named, only lived, only lost into, only become. To live is to drag the body through a world that was never meant to care for it. The flesh tears on thorns it did not plant. The soul weeps beneath a sky that neither hears nor responds. From the first cry at birth to the final breath that escapes unnoticed, the arc of life is stitched with pain. Not accidental, not occasional, but constitutive. Suffering is the thread that binds consciousness to matter, a reminder that to be awake is to be wounded. You watch as those around you decorate the wound. They give it names, adorn it with philosophies, medicate it with pleasures. But beneath every mask, the wound remains. Because the wound is not something that happened, it is what you are. The consciousness that perceives is already a fracture, a separation from the whole, a tear in the seamless fabric of the world. To know is to stand apart, and to stand apart is to ache for reunion that never comes. This is why love hurts even at its height, because it gestures toward union yet never achieves it. The bodies come close but never merge. The hearts beat near but remain alone. Love whispers of transcendence, but delivers only proximity. And the closer one comes, the more acute the knowledge that the other remains impenetrable. Each soul a solitary island, waving from the shore, but never crossing the sea. And yet we cling, not because we are foolish, but because the alternative is so unbearable. We cling to illusions, not out of error, but out of necessity. For most, truth would destroy. The masses do not want to awaken, they want anesthesia. And so culture provides it. Theaters of meaning, stories of progress, aesthetic diversions, technological marvels, rituals of belonging, all to obscure the silence, all to drown the unbearable light of awareness. But you see through it now. The veil no longer convinces, the performances no longer enthrall. You walk through the world like a ghost in a house of mirrors, seeing every reflection as false, every echo as manipulation. There is no longer any desire to play the game, and yet you remain here, breathing, watching, enduring, not from hope, not from ambition, but from a strange fidelity to truth, to bear witness without embellishment, to stand in the storm without shelter. You notice then that the soul, once stripped of its distractions, begins to observe more carefully, not to enjoy, but to comprehend. The way light moves across the floor, the sound of a distant bird, the wrinkles forming around your eyes. These are not consolations, they are facts. And in their bare facticity lies their power. They do not promise anything, they do not seduce, they merely exist. And in their existence, the ego begins to unravel. The ego, the story of me, of mine, of I, has always been the great deceiver. It builds itself from memory, from desire, from fear. It pretends to continuity. It believes itself sovereign. But watch it closely and it dissolves. It is not a thing, but a process. A flickering sequence of images and reactions. And when the will grows tired, the ego grows thin. You begin to see through it, and what you see is not another self, but the absence of self. Just awareness, vast and impersonal. At first, this absence terrifies. The loss of identity feels like death. But it is not death, it is liberation. For what dies is only the illusion of separateness. What remains is stillness. The stillness that was always beneath the noise. The stillness that does not move toward anything, that does not become. That simply is. And in that isness, suffering softens. Not because it ends, but because it is no longer resisted. Pain continues. Loss continues. The world remains what it is, indifferent, ceaseless, opaque. But your relationship to it shifts. You no longer ask it to be otherwise. You no longer plead for comfort. You watch the leaf fall without naming it tragic. You feel the wound without imagining it unjust. You recognize that everything is as it must be, not by design, but by necessity. And in that necessity, a subtle grace emerges. This grace does not smile, it does not rescue, it does not soothe, it simply permits. It permits life to be what it is. It permits you to feel without interpretation. It permits truth to remain cold. And in that coldness, something warmer than fire arises. Acceptance without condition. A silence that holds, not because it loves, but because it no longer denies. The will, having fought for so long, begins to bow. It ceases its endless clawing for more. It relinquishes its fevered insistence that life provide answers. And in that relinquishment, the world opens. Not as reward, but as revelation. Each moment becomes transparent. Each sorrow no longer needs explanation. You do not transcend suffering, you dissolve into it. You let it pass through you like wind through a tree. And afterward, nothing remains but presence. This presence is not personal. It does not belong to you. It is not something you achieve. It is what was always there, obscured by desire, veiled by thought. When the veils fall, you see it not as vision, but as being. And being is enough. Not because it satisfies, but because it ends the search. The search was suffering. Its end is stillness. You walk now through a world unchanged, yet utterly different. The same faces, the same streets, the same decay. But the weight has shifted. You no longer carry your story like a cross. You no longer defend your wounds like medals. You are not healed, but you no longer need to be. You simply are. And that is the most terrible and the most holy thing. Time continues its devouring. Friends depart. Bodies weaken. Dreams decay. But you no longer protest. Not out of defeat, but out of insight. You see that to protest what is to suffer twice. The first wound is real. The second is narrative. You release the second. The first becomes sacred. Pain without story. Sorrow without demand. Just the pure, unadulterated presence of life in its raw unfolding. And even death, the final specter, loses its sting. Not because it is conquered, but because it is seen clearly. As the final return. As the great letting go. Not of something that was truly yours, but of illusions you borrowed for a time. The self was never permanent. The breath was never guaranteed. Every heartbeat was a brief thunder in the storm of impermanence. And now, even the thunder grows still. What remains cannot be named. It is not consciousness, not soul, not spirit. It is the absence of need. The still awareness that watches the last flicker of the flame and does not flinch. That receives the void not as punishment, but as home. You feel it now, the strange peace. The unearned, unpromised, quiet. Not joy, not ecstasy, but serenity, born of nothing left to want. You do not speak. You do not teach. You do not preach. You merely dwell in the unfolding. And in that dwelling, you vanish. Not into oblivion, but into what always was. Beyond self. Beyond suffering. Beyond even the question of meaning. A flicker. A breath. A final silence. And then nothing. And in that nothing, all. When you cease to seek, the world ceases to deceive. It reveals itself as it always was. A shifting field of phenomena, indifferent to your joy, unmoved by your despair. Every mountain you thought sacred is stone. Every promise you once cherished is the voice of your own longing, reflected in empty air. The myth of significance disintegrates under the weight of presence. What remains is not bleakness, but lucidity, the pure gaze that sees without interpretation. And so you begin to walk differently, not faster, not slower, but lighter. Not because suffering is gone, but because the compulsion to make it mean something has died. You no longer expect, you no longer demand. You no longer dream in the way the suffering mind dreams. Of resolution, of arrival, of some final resting place where pain no longer follows. Instead, you learn to carry pain as you would carry a candle in the dark, carefully, gently, not hoping it will light the whole path, but content that it illumines even a single step. The self, once thought to be central, becomes transparent. Its boundaries dissolve into the greater current of causality. You see your choices not as acts of will, but as expressions of patterns that began long before you. Every gesture, every word, every silence, the unfolding of ancient roots through present soil. There is no blame here and no pride, only motion, only the great river moving through the vessel of your body, your thoughts, your days. And now even memory loosens its grip. What once defined you, the hurts, the victories, the milestones, becomes mist. You see that memory too is illusion, a shadow theater projected on the wall of time, each recollection stitched with narrative, altered by need. The past never returns as it was, but always as you now are. And since the self is gone, the past loses its weight. It no longer shackles. It no longer haunts. It simply evaporates. Others may look at you with confusion. They see absence where once there was hunger. They see silence where once there was ambition. You no longer participate in the rituals that hold them together, the endless affirmations, the desperate pursuit of novelty, the hollow words passed back and forth like coins without value. And in this quiet detachment, you become foreign. Not because you chose it, but because you no longer cling to what they must cling to in order to survive. This solitude is not loneliness. Loneliness is the longing for what is absent. Solitude is the presence of what remains when all longing falls away. In solitude, you meet not yourself, but the absence of self. You sit beside the wind. You walk beneath a moon that does not answer. You become the listener of a silence that predates language. And in that listening, you vanish. You learn then that even pain changes when observed without story. It becomes pure sensation, unfiltered, transient, impersonal. It rises, it peaks, it passes. Like the sound of rain, like the cry of a bird you will never see. You do not escape it, you embody it. You do not interpret it, you endure it. And in that endurance, it loses its teeth. Not because it has softened, but because you no longer struggle against its presence. The world becomes raw again. Not pristine, not ideal, but unprocessed. A face in the crowd becomes a landscape of weathered time. A cracked window becomes scripture. The patterns in decay reveal more than the promises of perfection ever did. The ordinary reveals its terrible beauty because you no longer ask it to entertain or console. You no longer beg it to reflect you. You simply bear witness. In this bearing, the last desire falls away. Not the desire to possess or to become, but the desire to understand. You see, that understanding too is a form of control, a last grasp at power over the unbearable. But the world is not a riddle to be solved. It is a presence to be endured. Its meaning lies in its resistance to meaning. And when you no longer ask why, you are free. Not because you have found the answer, but because you have ceased to believe that one is needed. Now you walk among the ruins, and they no longer grieve you. The broken monuments, the faded letters, the abandoned dreams, they are your kin. You recognize yourself in their stillness, in their quiet acceptance of time's erasure. You see that everything ends, and in that ending is a peace no beginning can offer, the peace of nothing more to lose. Others still rush to build, to claim, to declare. Let them. Their striving is not wrong, it is simply premature. They are still in the throes of illusion, still entangled in the dream that something out there will complete them. You cannot wake them, nor should you. Each soul must exhaust its own will, must climb its own summit only to find it empty. And even then, many will look for another peak, until the will itself collapses. Only then can the silence enter. And when it enters, it brings no voice, no guidance, no light, only space, infinite, indifferent space. In that space, you do not find peace, you become it. And this is the final irony. The self, which sought so desperately to be whole, disappears, and wholeness remains. Now the seasons pass through you, the faces grow older, the bodies change, the places vanish, the sounds fade. You do not resist, you do not hold on. Everything flows through the open hand, nothing stays, and yet nothing is missing. For when you cease to grasp, the whole world becomes enough. There is no more path, no more journey, no more becoming. There is only this moment, and the next, each complete, each passing, each silent. You are no longer a traveler. You are the still point through which all things pass. And even this, you do not own. Eventually, even words fall away. Even reflection becomes too heavy. You live as breath lives without purpose, without meaning, without need. You die before death. You vanish before vanishing. And in that absence, all suffering ceases not because it is gone, but because there is no one left to suffer. The silence deepens. The illusion has ended. Nothing remains but this. The silence now is not absence, But culmination, the stillness after the storm, not of calm, but of exhaustion, so complete it can no longer long for calm. You stand here, but the you that once strained against the world has dissolved. What remains watches without separation, a gaze without a center, not elevated, not fallen, merely present. The flickering candle of desire has guttered out, not by force, but by the natural waning of fuel. The will has burned itself hollow, and the world continues, not because it must, but because it does. The wind moves across dead fields with no intention. The stars spin in patterns too ancient for meaning. The cries of newborns and the groans of the dying echo with the same indifferent cadence. All of it persists without purpose, yet not without form. You do not bless it, nor curse it. You simply let it be. And in letting it be, the terrible burden of needing it to be otherwise is lifted. There is no transcendence, no new birth, no light at the end of anything, only the end of reaching, the end of the compulsion to arrange the world around your comfort, your ego, your imagined continuity. The dream of personal destiny disintegrates, not with violence, not with grief, but like a mist that vanishes under the gaze of the sun. You were never the dreamer, only the dream, and now even the dream slips quietly into the night. Do you feel the relief? Not joy, not lightness, but relief. The absence of striving, the release of tension that had coiled for decades. The mind no longer claws at the future. The heart no longer waits for fulfillment. The body no longer pleads for permanence. What remains is not peace, but the silence peace was always pointing toward. A silence too complete to be desired. A silence that does not end because it never began. The illusion of meaning was always the final veil. The belief that somewhere, somehow, all this pain must justify itself. But now you see it needs no justification. Like the rain, like decay, like the endless death of stars, it is what it is. And in seeing this, you are not freed, you simply stop demanding freedom. And that stopping, that falling away of even the need to be free, is the only liberation that was ever real. You sit now in the dark, but it is not the dark of despair. It is the dark of final understanding, the dark that no longer resists its own emptiness. There are no lanterns, no music, no reward for making it to the end. Only disquiet, like the earth after fire, like breath after crying. And in that quiet, you disappear. Not dramatically, not tragically. You vanish like a footprint in wind. And what is left behind is not a memory, not a name, but a space where once there was need. The screen fades, the voice ends, and there is only stillness.